For decades, governments around the world have denied their existence, but the truth can no longer be contained. Prepare to witness the astonishing evidence of UFO crashes that have been shrouded in secrecy for years. Declassified documents and leaked footage reveal a startling reality. We are not alone.
Organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the space shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume and possibly has one of the best NASA photos of all time, but it's his expertise and intelligence that really makes this story so unnerving. He claimed that while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which is definitely the coolest beginning for a spooky tale, but also really sets the stage for a multitude of horrifying things that could be about to happen. While he was on this mission, he said he saw a quote alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was quote translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and kind of terrifying, and it only adds more horror to the story when you realize that they tried to cover it up. In our number 9 spot today we have Levelland. This incident took place in 1957 in Levelland, Texas, and actually was the inspiration for a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the real-life incident, dozens of citizens from across the city began individually reporting seeing a rocket or strange set of lights or some sort of unidentified object, but that wasn't it. Whatever these citizens were seeing was also reportedly interfering with their vehicles as well. Engines were suddenly just dying out and lights were cutting out. If this happened just 1 or 2 times, this could have been some kind of a really strange coincidence, but it was way too many instances. Something else had to have been at play. The authorities at first thought that the reports were a hoax until they too saw the strange lights as they began to investigate. This is where Project Blue Book came in to also investigate, and they came up with quite the conclusion. They claimed that whatever had happened here was simply just a case of an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights in the mechanical malfunctions. That's super reasonable, but the catch with this explanation is that there were no reported thunderstorms in the area that night at all. I'm just saying, something here clearly isn't adding up quite right. In our number 8 spot today we have the lone survivor. This is an unexplained signal that was first detected in 2003 when astronomers were using a massive telescope in order to re-examine 200 different areas of the sky. I say re-examine because these were areas where there was once a signal that was detected coming from them, and they were taking a look back to see if they could detect the same signal again. During this re-examination, they found all of the signals had disappeared except for one. This signal didn't only stick around, but it actually got stronger. This signal is coming from between the constellations of Pisces and Aries, and the curious thing about this location is that it resides in a place where there are known obvious planets or stars. To make things a little more mysterious, there are scientists who believe that the frequency this signal is in is the frequency alien life would be most likely to use if they were trying to contact us. I have no idea what leads them to that theory, but it felt too interesting to exclude. While there are other possibilities of what these signals are or where they're coming from, it's quite an interesting piece of information and is something that definitely deserves more looking into. In our number 7 spot today we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that he saw something that I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry? Probably call Houston? I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I do find it really hard to believe that this person, who would likely be really familiar with the parts of a spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. Also, how would they not notice an 8-foot-long hose missing? Again, I'm certainly no astronaut or scientist or engineer, but it all just seems very strange. In our number 6 spot today, we have the classified report. We are just barely getting into 2023, but already there are some crazy announcements, including one regarding a report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there's been a total of 510 unidentified aerial phenomenon observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of these were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing, what we know as the public is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual, real, secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise, one day we'll find out. And hey, maybe if they don't, maybe Anonymous will just hack them. And then we'll find out. 10th spot, we have the Valensole incident. Everywhere's gotta have their Roswell incident, and this one is said to be France's. This sighting was made by a man named Maurice Masse, who is a French farmer, and it took place in July of 1965. One day, before starting work while outside smoking, Maurice witnessed an object coming out of the sky and landing in his lavender field about 200 feet away from where he was. He was, of course, frustrated at someone landing in his field, and figured that it was likely a helicopter that made some sort of unauthorized landing, but as he got closer, things took quite the turn. He realized this was no helicopter and instead was some sort of oval-shaped structure that was standing on 4 legs. In front of the strange craft were 2 figures, just under 4 feet tall. He explained that they were making a sort of grumbling sound and included a brief description of these creatures before explaining that one of them took out a pencil-like device and pointed it at him, which left him completely stuck in his tracks, just frozen in time. As he was stuck there, the creatures got back on their craft and took off, and after about 20 minutes, he finally regained his ability to move. Here's the thing, to me this just sounds like a fantastical story, but there was some kind of physical evidence left behind that I, and many others, can't quite figure out an explanation to. Basically, the craft did end up leaving a mark. There was a hole and a lot of moisture left over from where the craft was. Like I mentioned, this was in the middle of a lavender field. Soon after this area became really hard, almost like concrete, and definitely not like the soil everywhere else in the field, and all of the plants around this area started to die. Analysis of the soil revealed that there was a higher amount of calcium in the soil at the landing site than there was anywhere else. This definitely shows that there was some kind of unusual event, but could Maurice be telling the truth? In our number 9 spot today, we have the Broadhaven UFO sightings. This UFO sighting took place all the way back in 1977, and it started when an entire class of children all claimed to see some sort of object flying through the sky. The children rightfully were confused and excited over what they had seen, but of course the teachers and adults around them believed it was just their wild imaginations making it up. This is when they decided to split all of the children up and have them draw what it is that they saw. While there of course were variations in all of the children's drawings, they all were basically the same thing, which begs the question, did they all really see this thing then? The children weren't the only ones who saw it either. Shortly after their sighting, other local residents began to explain that they had seen something strange flying through the air, including one hotel owner. One of the things that really gets people about this case, and these sightings in particular, is that all these different people claimed to have seen something at that time, and even though it's been almost half a century, not a single one of them has ever said that it was a hoax or that they were lying about what they saw. They all have the same story they did the day that it happened. In our number 8 spot today, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, so I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying that I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner when he allegedly saw something he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering silver disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett only 10 miles from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13, but the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified, along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of the horrible incident. In our number 7 spot today, we have Levelland. This incident took place in 1957 in Levelland, Texas, and actually was the inspiration for a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the real-life incident, dozens of citizens from across the city began individually reporting seeing a rocket or a strange set of lights or some sort of unidentified object, but that wasn't it. Whatever these citizens were seeing was also reportedly interfering with their vehicles as well. Engines were just suddenly dying out and lights were cutting off. If this happened to just one or two, this could have been some kind of strange coincidence, but it was way too many instances. Something else definitely had to have been at play. The authorities at first thought that the reports were a hoax until they too saw the strange lights as they began to investigate. This is where Project Blue Book came in to investigate, and they came up with quite the conclusion. They claimed that what had happened here was simply just a case of an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights and the mechanical malfunctions. That's super reasonable, but the catch with this explanation is that there were no reported thunderstorms in the area that night at all. I'm just saying, something here clearly isn't adding up quite right. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Air Force disappearance. On the night of November 23rd, 1953, near the Canadian-US border, the United States Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar where there shouldn't have been one. This was showing that there was some sort of unidentified object that was in restricted airspace over Lake Superior. In response to this, an F-89C Scorpion jet was sent to investigate with 2 crew members. First Lieutenant Felix Moncla was piloting the craft, while Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson was observing the radar. Once in the air, the pair had trouble tracking the object, which kept changing its course, which then led to ground control helping to direct them. The jet pursued the unknown object for 30 minutes as it closed in on it at 500 miles per hour. After a while, the 2 blips on the radar, one being the unknown object and the other being the investigating jet, converged into one point, and then suddenly the radar return from the F-89 simply just disappeared from ground control's radar scope. Shortly after this, the radar blip that was from the unidentified object also veered off and then vanished. The men who were sent to investigate in the jet never returned from the mission, and there was never any wreckage found signifying an accident despite extensive searches. The men and the jet just disappeared completely. It is said that the explanations for the disappearance that have been released throughout the years have changed and flip-flopped in what they say happened, so at this point no one has any idea what truly happened here. In our number 5 spot today, we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this, however, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this really unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, it is said that they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went out to describe the lights and said that they were in the formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up just stumbling upon this bizarre situation as the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it. I mean, I think it's aliens. I just don't have any other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? Not just one person this time, all of them. I swear, nothing will convince me of aliens more than an astronaut's first-hand account. Cause like, it's hard for aliens to come and visit us here on Earth, but like, they're just flying through space? They're like, yeah man, this is what we do too, just on the highway. Okay, sorry, I'm going a little crazy. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951 in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 bluish-green lights passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of these scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting, but what was it? The scientists weren't the only one to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they had witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the flights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though, the government did end up investigating, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from Mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds. They weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professors saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomena. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that this mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. You know? It's just some natural phenomena. We're not going to tell you which one though. In our number 3 spot today we have glowing green. Gordon Cooper is a well-known astronaut after having flown the Mercury 9 and the Gemini 5, and in fact he was the last American to spend time in space alone. But despite all of these exciting accolades, I want to take you back to May 15th, 1963. Here he was sent off into space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey he saw something extremely unsettling. A glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer questions regarding this UFO. It's even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a very vocal and firm believer in UFOs, so I have to ask, what do you think this was? In our number 2 spot today we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claim to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy saw 4 blips on the decorator that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't even the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in the investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could all of these witnesses have seen? Since they never never officially identified what it was. In the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO. In our number 1 spot today, we have the 2021 UFO. On February 21st of 2021, a blogger was using a radio scanner to try and pick up the feed from an aircraft when he received much more than he ever expected. He intercepted the transmission of the wrong aircraft, but at the right time. As an American Airlines flight was headed from Cincinnati to Phoenix around 1:19 p.m., the pilot came on the radio to ask the question, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." After this, he followed up with, quote, "I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over top of us." Not only were FAA air traffic controllers not able to see any object in the area on their radar scope, but they still have been unable to identify exactly what it could have been. This does happen more often than any of us really know, and it is possible that the object could have been a part of some covert military or Navy operation, but it certainly raises some alarm bells that it was unable to be tracked in any sort of capacity. I wonder if this is one of these stories that will remain a mystery, or if one day we'll get some sort of answers as to what exactly happened. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This whole rigmarole started in 1947 when some sort of a crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead was a conventional weather balloon. This was a little sketchy, but most people just let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, but also that extraterrestrial remains were also recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, this whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying about it. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Foo Fighters. On a late November evening in 1944, nearing the end of the Second World War, Lieutenant Fred Ringwald was riding as observer in a night fighter that was being piloted by Lieutenant Ed Schluter with Lieutenant Donald J. Myers on radar. The men were in the Rhine Valley, which sits north of Strasbourg on the French and German border, when Lieutenant Ringwald saw something. He said, quote, "I wonder what those lights are over there in the hill." When the rest turned to look, they saw 8 to 10 fiery orange glowing lights. They checked with the ground radar, but nothing was registering. The men thought that there was a chance that these lights could be some kind of air weapon, so they turned themselves to be ready to fight, only to have the lights suddenly vanish. The 3 men who experienced the strange lights at first didn't tell anyone about what they saw because they feared being ostracized by those around them. This all changed, however, when stories of similar sightings began to spread through their unit. As it would turn out, many other pilots and flight crews experienced these same orange glowing lights, and one pilot even experienced a strange cigar-shaped flying object in this scenario. In this instance, the UFO was described as, quote, "a wingless cigar-shaped object glowing red just a few yards off the plane's wingtip." Lieutenant Krasny, justifiably spooked, instructed the pilot to attempt evasive maneuvers, but the glowing object stayed right next to the jet for several minutes before it, quote, "flew off and disappeared." Throughout the years, the explanations for what these people saw have ranged from things like combat fatigue to the works of Nazi astrophysicists, so at this point, what exactly happened here remains quite a mystery. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a strange string of smaller lights trailing it. Shortly after they noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later, there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in the investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were totally accounted for. So what could these witnesses have all seen? Since they never officially identified what it was, in the official Government of Canada documents it is listed as a UFO. In our number 2 spot today we have the Betty and Barney Hill case. The Betty and Barney Hill case is definitely one of the most famous UFO abduction stories ever told, and it absolutely has some pretty compelling components. Basically, the story goes that the two were driving on a road in New Hampshire one night on the way home from a trip the pair had taken. Before they got into the car on their way home, they were in a diner and figured that if they really pushed through, they could beat the wind and rains from an approaching hurricane. It was 10 p.m. when they left the diner, and they figured by around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. latest, they'd arrive home. As they drove, out of nowhere, a bright light started to follow them. Suddenly, they arrive home and it's somehow daylight, and their clothes are dirty and ripped, and their watches had stopped working. This is all jarring enough, but neither Betty nor Barney could figure out what happened. They were both missing time. Later, during a session with a psychiatrist, they were able to recall being touched by aliens during their abduction. Project Blue Book would come to investigate their claims, and while people remain skeptical, no one has ever been able to debunk their story. This officially went on to become the first ever widely publicized abduction story, and to this day, people still debate what really happened to the Hills. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that, at the time, was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. Well, there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been. One witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he had ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object, it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. Then they would take off after it again, and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it, and when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them about it. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely a strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions. In our number 10 spot, we have the Disclosure Project. The Disclosure Project is a non-profit organization founded in 1993 by Dr. Stephen M. Greer, who was a physician and UFOologist, and the goal of the project is to bring forth information about the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and their interactions with humanity to the public and government officials. The organization has collected over 800 witness testimonies from military, government, and intelligence officials who have had direct involvement with UFO sightings and extraterrestrial extraterrestrial encounters. Literally, this entire group is aimed at doing exactly what we're here talking about today. The Disclosure Project believes that governments around the world have been suppressing information about the existence of extraterrestrial life, and that the truth needs to be disclosed to the public. We love a little whistleblowing. They advocate for the declassification of government files related to UFO sightings and for public hearings on the issue. The organization has received criticism and skepticism from some who believe their claims are unfounded. However, the Disclosure Project continues to push for transparency and the release of information to help us better understand our place in the universe. Did you see those James Webb photos? How are we supposed to understand our place in the universe? Alright, when the universe is that big, buddy, still processing it. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chilean UFO. Okay, so it turns out that there's been a lot of UFOs spotted in Chile, and the government isn't exactly shy about releasing some of the footage. In 2010, the Chilean government released a series of UFO footage that has since become one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the history of the phenomenon. The incident began in November 2010 when Chile's National Agency for UFO Research received reports of strange objects in the sky over the country's capital, Santiago. The agency then requested the assistance of the Chilean Air Force to investigate the sightings. The Air Force dispatched a team of experienced pilots to investigate the objects, which had been picked up on radar. The pilots were able to track the objects and capture video footage using advanced equipment. The footage showed multiple objects flying in formation at high speeds, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible, really, for any known aircraft. After careful analysis, the Chilean government concluded that the objects were not weather balloons, they were not aircrafts, or any other known objects. While the government did not explicitly state that the objects were extraterrestrial in nature, the incident has been widely regarded as one of the most credible pieces of evidence in support of the existence of UFOs. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Go Faster video. In 2017, after the existence of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program became more well known, a video was released of an encounter between an FA-18 Super Hornet and some sort of unidentified flying object. This encounter wasn't actually supposed to be released initially, but the New York Times allegedly leaked it, so the government didn't really have much of a choice and decided to release it themselves. This video was the third in a series of 3 videos. We will talk about another one later on in this list. With this particular video, there weren't a ton of details released about exactly what happened during this encounter, but using the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, they were able to capture an extremely fast-moving white oval that was around 45 feet long. The oval had no wings and didn't appear to have any kind of exhaust either. They were tracking the UFO at an altitude of 25,000 feet just above the Atlantic Ocean, and they were shocked as the craft rotated on its axis and flew away. There was no explanation released with the footage because it truly is unbelievable and currently unexplainable. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights UFO incident occurred on March 13th, 1997, when thousands of people in Arizona reported seeing a series of bright lights in the sky in a V-shaped formation. Eyewitnesses described the lights as silent and moving slowly across the sky. The event gained significant media attention and became one of the most well-known UFO sightings in history. Some skeptics dismissed it as flares or a military exercise, but many other witnesses remained convinced that they had witnessed something otherworldly. One of the most interesting witnesses in this case is former Arizona Governor Fife Symington. In 2007, he decided to reveal that he had seen the object himself, and not only this, but he described it as not from this world. Despite the multiple witnesses and this government official's testimony, the incident remains a mystery, and to this day, no official explanation has been given for the strange lights seen in the sky. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Project Blue Book sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was once tasked with being an investigator for Project Blue Book, which was the name used to describe a study of UFOs conducted by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to December 17, 1969, when the project was terminated. While his job was meant to be to investigate and essentially debunk UFO sightings, later in life he took to Congress to stand up and explain his own UFO encounter that he was never able to explain away. The moment that truly stuck with him all of these years took place back in 1952. He was sent off to Newfoundland after there were reports that a UFO had crashed off of the coast of St. John's. As he arrived to the scene, there were at least 100 people who all stood and stared into the water, and as he was able to follow their gaze and see what they were all looking at, he couldn't believe his eyes. He recalled the water being quite clear, and under it you could see two circular crafts, each one approximately 18 feet in diameter. He said that they were both floating just below the surface of the water, no more than 20 feet from the shore, and not only this, but he could also see two beings with the crafts. He said, quote, "The first thing I saw was the UFOs, and it was apparent to me that they were doing something to the craft, and I couldn't really tell what because they were on the bottom side of it and not visible to me except when they would occasionally get over to the side where I could see them." He claimed he watched on as the beings worked on the craft until one of them raised out of the water and disappeared, but not before accelerating to speeds in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 miles an hour.
Off the number 10 is the underwater base. Now, Argentine researcher Marcelo Igazusta found what he believes to be an underwater alien base. The object is 8.5 miles long and it seems to be a pyramid of some kind. It's located right off the coast of Mexico near the ancient Aztec and Mayan pyramids, which could be coincidental or totally random. Since this pyramid has an 8.5-mile base, that catapults it into being the biggest pyramid in the world. Forget Egypt, humans could have never built something like that, especially underwater, so Marcelo believes only aliens could have accomplished it. I mean, cut us some more slack, we're better than that. He believes either the base was there from before or an alien craft landed in the water and was built to do so and they just never left. And coming in at number 9 is the Arctic landing. So okay, bit of fake advertisement, this one isn't located in the Arctic, it's actually located in Antarctica. Not the same thing, you guys. Either way, Russian UFO enthusiast Valentin Degratev claims he found an alien crash site in Antarctica. There seems to be a saucer-shaped dent in the snow, like the flying saucer landed on its side and just went straight through the snow. I hope you got what I meant when I did that. I mean, I need to speculate and offer other explanations like, okay, is the ice breaking apart underneath there and that's what's causing the slit? But I feel like that's far-fetched, but then again, so is a flying saucer. But it is peculiar and it's surrounded by ridges and flat snow, so it's just a big unexplainable anomaly. I don't know, guys. Is it just a random slit? Is it an alien saucer? I don't really know. At number 8 we have the Martian twins. Now during the Kofun era in Japan, which was during 300 to 538 AD, they used to build Kofun tombs. And these tombs were for people of the ruling class and they were shaped like keyholes most commonly and surrounded by water. That's all well and good, but alien hunters spotted a mound on Mars that looked identical to one specific Kofun era tomb. Now they fully believe that the suspicious similarities between both features is evidence that Martians settled on Earth centuries ago after a catastrophic unknown event forced them to leave the red planet. They ended up building a similar structure on Earth and then going back to Mars when it was finally appropriate. But again, I feel like this whole theory is speculation. How do we know what this catastrophic unknown event was, and if it even happened? If aliens have the technology to travel to another planet and set up camp there, surely they could have evaded whichever terrible thing happened on Mars. Is that too much to ask? I don't think it is. I don't think my expectations are that high, you guys. Plausible. Filling on number 7 slot is the alien base. Now back in April of this year, a few UFO hunters were searching Google Earth for some sus looking and boy did they find it. There's this really weird 500-meter long object off the coast of Antarctica that from the top looks like an iceberg but literally isn't. The left of it is oddly straight and the top has vertical ridges on it, making it not look like an iceberg at all. According to UFO sightings hotspot, it doesn't fit the description of an iceberg, and I quote, "I'm not an iceberg expert, but this object is really peculiar and looks like a vessel disguised as an iceberg." I have to fully agree with you, honestly. I feel like the aliens were probably like, hey, just cover the top in an ice sheet. These dumb humans won't notice the difference. But we did. We are on to you. Dumb humans, May have taken us a few years, but we got there. Now at number 6 is bad parking. I just found this one hilarious because alien life is meant to be so advanced and ahead of us, and I look at this image and I'm like, were you drunk driving? Like, this is shockingly bad. Now the image was located by YouTube channel Secure Team 10, who found it crash landed in a restricted part of Arizona with a white blacked out car parked next to it. CIA perhaps? Probably. Now the flying saucer looks really old fashioned if anything, like it's not slick or thin, and I'm pretty sure it landed upside down, which is what's really funny to me. Like, how do you mess up a landing that badly? Maybe the aliens decided to take one of the old ones for a ride and then didn't realize how outdated it was, and then boom, disaster, flipped it over. You're gonna be grounded when you get back to your planet.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the Coyne Mansfield incident. The Coyne Mansfield helicopter incident occurred on October 18, 1973, when 4 members of the Ohio Army National Guard were flying in a helicopter over Mansfield, Ohio. Suddenly, they encountered a large metallic disc-shaped object that was hovering in the sky. The object began to move towards the helicopter, causing the crew to take evasive maneuvers. Despite their efforts, the object continued to follow them, eventually passing overhead and disappearing into the distance. The crew reported the incident to their superiors, and an investigation was launched by the military and the Federal Aviation Administration. The incident received significant media attention, and it remains one of the most compelling UFO sightings on record. What makes this incident particularly intriguing is the credibility of the witnesses. The crew were experienced pilots with military training, and their account of the incident was corroborated by radar data and other witnesses on the ground. Despite the extensive investigations, no satisfactory explanation has ever been offered for what they saw that day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Congress report. For this one, we are talking about a recent report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510 unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of these were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing. What we, as the public, know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual, real, secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise one day, we'll find out. In our number 3 spot today, we have the advanced technology. So this UFO sighting comes from a while ago, but it just recently became quite relevant, and that is because some former US Air Force personnel have begun explaining to the Pentagon that they believe back in the 60s there were UFOs that supposedly had the ability to turn off their nuclear warheads. Apparently these officers recently told this to the government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who had contacted former Air Force ICBM launch officer Robert Salas to get information about the encounter with an orange flying disc that switched off 10 warheads at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1963. There was another former officer, Dr. Robert Jacobs, who also apparently told the AARO that he had gone as far as to make a film of the UFO for the Air Force in 1964, and that this film captured images of a UFO shooting a test missile out of the sky. With the piquing interest in UFOs and the potential for an advanced civilization apart from our own, it appears as though the government is spending more time now researching and looking into these claims because, well, why would they make them up and then continue on with the same story some 50 years later? In our number 2 spot today, we have the USS Nimitz tic-tac UFO incident. This UFO sighting comes from 2004. On November 14th of that year, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out at around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate went over in 2 fighter jets, and when they arrived they saw what at first appeared to be churning water, while there was an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it. Like no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jets didn't pick up any sort of exhaust. The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. And when I say quickly, I mean that it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of the fighter jets. So faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know exactly what it was, but it certainly was beyond our current capabilities. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This incident is like the mecca when it comes to a government leak. I mean, this incident is infamous for a reason. The whole thing started in 1947 when some sort of crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead it was just a conventional weather balloon. So it was a little sketchy, but most people just let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, but also that extraterrestrial remains were recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, the whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying about it. That's what.
Coming in at number 5 is the slit. In the very remote British territory of South Georgia, a really strange thing was found in the snow, and no, we're not talking about my ex, but wow, he keeps popping up in these videos. Now, alien hunting YouTube channel Secure Team 10 found a slit in the snow that they claim has all the signs that point to a UFO crash landing. It has the exact trajectory of an angular flying object that came to a screeching halt in the snow. Now, the imprint isn't a plane, otherwise we would have known. It's not military craft, or we would have known, and the crash is too narrow and small to be anything other than an alien craft. But I mean, I don't really know. I think calling every weird slit in the snow an alien crash landing is a bit of a cop-out, but alien hunters clearly know better than I do, so I'ma just leave it to the experts. At number 4 is the flying saucer. Clearly you can tell I'm running out of title ideas, and I mean there's only so many different ways you can say spaceship, okay? Either way, YouTube channel Secure Team found an image on Google Earth that they believe is a flying saucer. Located in the South Pole, the circular object in question is sticking out of a mountain amongst the snow. But the rocky areas around it are quite rigid and randomly cut, whereas this object is oddly round, and like perfectly round at that. And I can't zoom in enough to tell if it's just a round cut of water that's randomly there or if it's actually alien aircraft. But since I've never seen alien aircraft, I don't even know. Even if I could zoom in, would I know? Who knows? Now there's like a thinner outline inside the actual outline of the round bit, which seems unnatural to me. Like there's no way that bit's natural. Has to be man-made or alien made. But I feel like zooming in more is necessary to get an actual conclusion, and alas, I can't do that. And I'm definitely not gonna go to Antarctica just to find out. But you can, and let me know if you do. Filling our number 3 slot is the floating island. Now located in Argentina, back in 2016, UFO sightings daily fully believed this floating island was the entrance to an alien base. On Google Maps, it looks like a random crescent was cut out of the greenery in the area. Like there's no other shape like that found nearby, or on the continent, or in the country for that matter. The island actually moves and rotates in a circle, and considering Argentina has had many UFO sightings over the years, it could be possible that aliens have their base underneath this island. Never say never. Now the slit could easily fit a 100-meter UFO through it, and no one has actually gone and explored the water beneath the floating island. I think it's just really weird how there's like an oddly perfect circular island that magically got cut out by Mother Nature, and oh, it also rotates and moves. Like, nah honey, that's not Mother Nature, that is alien nature. Now at number 2 are the skid marks. Now, in June of this year, UFO theorist Scott Waring found what he believed to be an alien crash site in Antarctica, because apparently that's the go-to landing pad for most aliens on this list. It's located towards the north of the island off the coast of another little island, if you know what that means, because I don't, since I'm not an Antarctica expert. Now on the image, he claims part of the UFO's wing is folded up and its concave area is severely dented. There are evident burn skid marks trailing behind the craft, and the craft itself looks to be made of some metallic material. The craft is apparently 96 meters long, while the trail it left behind it is nearly 450 meters long, so clearly it was a really rough landing. And finally, at number 1 is the debated. So even though this one has been debunked, I put it as number 1 because it was so widely believed to be an alien crash landing site for so long before, you know, it obviously wasn't. Now the satellite image shows a mountainous island off the coast of Antarctica. Now in the smooth snow, there's a block of something that's crashed into the snow, leaving a long deep trail behind it. I mean, and I get the allegation, it's narrow, and how often do things really crash into Antarctica unless it's a UFO? From this list, clearly, so I get why the thought was there. And the trail is quite long, but if you follow the trail back, you'll see the trail goes back to a mountain peak and a bunch of disturbed snow. And how many times did I just say trail in the last 30 seconds? Now people believe an avalanche occurred and debris was what the object was, or perhaps it was a trapped submarine, I don't really know. Either way, debunked, finally.
The incident is arguably the most famous UFO crash in history, although the government would claim otherwise. Basically, on June 24th of 1947, while searching for a crashed military aircraft, pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 UFOs flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state in the US. The objects were flying in formation at a height of about 10,000 feet and a speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers per hour, which was not possible at the time, for humans that is. Kenneth described the way the objects moved as jerky, like rocks skipping over the water, flashing forward at strange intervals. When the media got a hold of the story, they coined the phrase flying saucer, and the UFO craze took off at hyperspeed, especially when on July 7th, a local rancher named Mac Brazel called the sheriff to let him know that one of those objects had somehow ended up on his farm, and this came to be known as the Roswell incident.
It was back in July of 1947 that something strange happened near Roswell, New Mexico. Something had crashed into the ground, into Brazel's farm. There were metal pieces, rubber strips, and a strange tin foil-like material. The nearby Roswell Army airfield was alerted. The military came out and collected the debris. At first they issued a press release saying they had recovered an unknown flying disc. This really got people talking, but just a day later the Army changed their story, saying it was actually just a weather balloon. Now, while some of the public took this at face value, it caused some controversy, especially in the years to come. People started to believe that the military was covering up something much bigger, possibly an alien spacecraft crash. Over the years, people started to come forward claiming to have seen the wreckage, and not only were there strange markings on the material described by some as hieroglyphics, but the material was incredibly strong and seemed to almost be impossible to burn. Oh, and of course, people who'd been called to the site to recover the material claimed to have seen bodies that were clearly not human. Over the years, many people have questioned the official explanation for this incident. Even former military personnel and locals said they saw strange things at the crash site, like debris that didn't look like it came from any known aircraft, and even small bodies that didn't seem human. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report saying the debris was from a top secret project called Project Mogul, a project that used high altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They said the unusual materials found were just parts of these balloons and their sensors, but this explanation didn't satisfy everyone. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of the incident, the Air Force released another report to address the claims about these alien bodies. They said these were actually just crash test dummies used in military experiments, not extraterrestrial beings. But again, a lot of people were and still are highly skeptical of this. The Roswell incident happened less than 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. Those bombs were created through a secret project that lasted 3 years and had 3 main sites, including one in New Mexico. So if the government could keep the atomic bomb a secret for so long, why wouldn't they be able and willing to hide information about a crashed UFO landing? Plus, little mannequins? I think most people would look at that and be able to tell the difference between an alien and a crash test dummy.
If you know anything about UFOs, you know about the Roswell incident that took place on a farm in Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947. But if you don't, here's the quick notes. In 1947, a UFO crash landed on Mac Brazel's farm. He didn't think much of it until UFO reports started coming out in the local newspaper. Brazel notified local authorities, the Air Force got involved, the crashed object was taken to Area 51, and the whole thing was written off as a crashed weather balloon, despite Brazel and military personnel claiming otherwise. Well, did you know that from 1947 to 2018, the crash site was a designated no-go zone? That's right, the entire area was closed off to the public for an entire 71 years, likely so the government could cover all their bases in ensuring that the public would never know the true nature of the crash. In 2018, the site was finally reopened to the public, but unfortunately, at this point, all evidence of what was most definitely an alien spaceship, you don't close off an area for 71 years because of a crashed weather balloon, is now long gone.
The Kecksburg UFO case has to be one of the strangest UFO cases in history. On December 9th, 1965, people in 6 US states, as well as parts of Canada, reported spotting a fireball streak across the sky over Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. Then folks in the small village of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, claimed to see something crash into the woods after seeing wisps of blue smoke and feeling vibrations. Authorities cordoned off the area and searched the forest, later claiming to find nothing and saying the object was likely just a meteor. But that didn't line up with what a number of witnesses had seen. People who did manage to get close to the crash site described seeing a large acorn-shaped object partially buried in the ground. It was about the size of a small car and had strange markings that almost looked like hieroglyphics. But they didn't get a very long look before the military stepped in. So what exactly was this object? Was it a Soviet satellite? A piece of top-secret military equipment? Was it not from Earth at all? This case is nowhere near as famous as something like Roswell, but it has come up on shows like Unsolved Mysteries, and UFO investigators still reference it to this day. But the truth as to what really crashed into the forest is still undisclosed.
Since the Roswell incident, New Mexico has been a hot spot for UFO sightings. UFO crashes, however, are far less common, but they still do happen, no matter how much the FBI and the Pentagon wants us to think they don't. Luckily, free speech is still more or less a thing. Or we probably never would have heard of the March 25th, 1948 UFO crash at Hart Canyon hiking trail, in which a spacecraft of unknown origins crashed into the mesa and was promptly recovered and covered up by the United States Air Force and 5th Army Division. According to a plaque located at the site, the recovery operation took a total of 2 weeks to complete, and all materials taken from the site were brought to the Los Alamos Laboratory for scientific study and evaluation. According to eyewitness reports, the spacecraft was approximately 100 feet in diameter and 18 feet tall, and according to insiders, it had been transporting as many as 16 extraterrestrials who, unfortunately, all died on impact. So this foreign object that landed on Mac Brazel's farm actually did so a few days prior to him calling into the sheriff's department. To be honest, he hadn't thought much of it until he started reading about Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers, and UFOs in the papers. Once he learned about the possible presence of technologically advanced ships with no known origin that likely came from outer space, he began to wonder if that was in fact what had landed on his farm just a few nights ago, and so he gathered up some of the debris and took them down to the local police station. In response, the sheriff immediately contacted the nearby army base, and soon intelligence officer Jesse Marcel had arrived on the scene and instructed Brazel to take him to the crash site so that the two could collect more debris. So let's talk about Jesse Marcel, the first military officer to step foot on the scene of the crash, because apparently Jesse had a lot to say, according to his son Jesse Jr., who went on to tell his father's story after his death in 19
1986. According to Jesse Jr., in 1947, when he was just 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night, excited after having visited the crash site. Jesse Jr. sat up as Jesse Sr. handed him some of the debris he had collected earlier that day on Brazelle's farm, and he told Jesse Jr. to get a good look because the debris were something that he would never see again. They were not of this earth, and the pair simply could not make sense of them. Out of all of the debris his father had brought home, Jesse Jr. said that the one that fascinated him most was a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics. I suppose it's not difficult to see why the pair didn't believe the government when they released a report saying that what had been found on the Brazelle's farm was nothing more than a discarded weather balloon. But of course, you don't mess with the government. And so for years, both Jesse Jr. and his father kept quiet about what they had seen. That is until in the late 1970s, a man named Stanton Friedman showed up asking questions. Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned ufologist, tracked down Jesse Sr. after being tipped off that a retired military man might know something about the Roswell incident, something that had been kept from the public for the past 31 years. And it turns out he did. Jesse Sr. told Freeman that the weather balloon story had in fact been a cover-up, and that the original wreckage had been replaced with a weather balloon shortly after military personnel first arrived on the scene. Not only that, but Jesse claimed that despite what their superiors had wanted them to believe, it was incredibly clear to everyone working on the site that the object had in fact been an extraterrestrial spaceship with outstanding craftsmanship and incredibly advanced out-of-this-world technologies. Although, unfortunately, Jesse did claim that he never got to witness the alleged aliens inside of the craft being pulled out, but still, he's ex-military, he was there. It's a pretty compelling case if you ask me.
There are also witnesses aside from Brazelle's claiming to have seen some strange things. So many of these witnesses stayed silent for years, but eventually began speaking out to close friends or family about what they'd seen, still fearing repercussions from the government. There was another crash site about 40 miles from Brazelle's ranch where more wreckage and alien bodies were said to be being recovered. A firefighter who went to this site claimed that he saw a large disc in the ground and several small, non-human bodies nearby. He said that military officials told him to keep quiet about what he saw. Sergeant Melvin Brown also shared his experience. He said he rode in a truck with the bodies from the crash site to Roswell Field and then stood guard at the hangar where they were first kept. He was instructed not to look under a tarp, but he got curious and he peeked. He claimed he saw 2 alien bodies. The government has always denied his claims, but several people who were there or knew people who were there have said they saw wreckage and bodies arrive at Wright Field. Retired General Arthur Exon stated that a top secret committee was set up to oversee the investigation of this and other classified UFO incidents. After the Roswell crash, the debris was secretly flown from Fort Worth, Texas to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. At Wright Field, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon, who later became the base commander, recalled that some of the material was very thin, but incredibly strong. And it wasn't just metal that arrived at Wright Field either. At the second crash site a few miles from the first, they discovered a smaller, more intact craft and 4 bodies lying nearby. These bodies did not look human. Again, according to witnesses, the bodies were described as being in fairly good condition despite having been exposed for 6 days. Some parts of the bodies have been chewed on by animals. Descriptions from those who saw the bodies are pretty consistent. They were said to be 4 to 5 feet tall, with big heads, large eyes, and small mouths. Basically your classic idea of an alien. They had thin bodies with long arms and 4 fingers. An army nurse who worked on the initial autopsy described how fragile the skulls and bones were too. The bodies were quickly placed in large, sealed wooden crates, loaded onto a B-29 bomber and flown to Fort Worth before being sent to Wright Field.
Now, the general public weren't the only ones concerned with the Roswell crash. In fact, one of the highest members of government was too, the president, which at the time was Harry S. Truman. After the incident took place, Truman became increasingly interested and concerned with UFOs, so much so that in 1948 he called a meeting with his military aide, Colonel Robert Laundrie, in the Oval Office to discuss UFO reports and what they might mean for the security of the country. Laundrie told Truman that, quote, quote, all manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people as of late, which only led the president to worry more about the possibility of new, never-before-seen threats to the American people. And so Truman ordered a quarterly oral report from both Laundrie and the Air Force to be presented to him at the White House to discuss whether or not the UFO sightings would present any kind of immediate danger. Although neither the military or the Air Force were ever able or willing to provide Truman with any answers, the UFO sightings kept coming and officials became more and more confused. To this day, it's unclear what information the government has gathered on UFOs, but what we do know is that if they do in fact have concrete evidence supporting the existence of alien life forms, they sure as heck aren't sharing it with us. Yet, fingers crossed.
The Roswell incident was the catalyst for pretty much every modern UFO conspiracy today. Before Roswell, the idea of aliens was just that, really, an idea. But when stories about this mysterious crash hit the papers, it really changed the public's view of the possibility of alien life forever. Suddenly, what people had read about in science fiction and fantasy novels or watched on the big screen was something a lot more concrete. Project Blue Book formed a few years after the Roswell incident, a genuine Air Force program dedicated to investigating UFOs, at least in the early days. Area 51, the mysterious Men in Black, Majestic 12, all of these things started being whispered about in the years following. In the spring of 1941, 6 years before the infamous Roswell incident, something crashed just outside Cape Girardeau, Missouri. A local Reverend William Huffman had been called to perform last rites at the site, and when he arrived, he was shocked to see a strange metallic saucer-shaped object. Around it were small bodies, and the bodies didn't look human. He claimed the bodies were about 4 feet tall, with large heads and eyes and thin limbs. The military quickly took control, removing the wreckage and the bodies, and the incident was hushed up. The story remained mostly a family secret until years later, when Huffman's granddaughter, Charlotte Mann, recounted what her grandmother had told her. According to Mann, her grandfather also saw strange hieroglyphic-like symbols inside of this craft, similar to those described in other UFO crash stories. No official documents confirming the crash have ever been released, but some say this is just another example of a successful government cover-up.
While Ohio's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is not believed to be a secret crash site, many people do claim that it is a place where crashed UFOs are taken to be studied and reverse engineered. Specifically in Hangar 18, the legendary alien warehouse located on the base, where many UFO enthusiasts believe the government hides flying saucer debris, the remains of extraterrestrials, and even live aliens. Speculation of the base began after the Roswell incident in 1947, and it has continued to this day, with many people claiming that reliable sources have confirmed its existence, i.e. former military personnel. One such man was a military pilot named Oliver Henderson, who allegedly told his wife that while working for the base he was required to fly a plane filled with UFO debris and several small alien bodies from Roswell to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Another former pilot, Marion Black Mac McGruger, claimed that scientists at the base conducted experiments on a live extraterrestrial being and ended up killing it. Many other experiments are said to have been carried out at the base as well, although according to the FBI, the Pentagon, and the government, it's just a regular Air Force base where everything is completely above board.
On May 21st, 1953, there were a number of reports that a UFO crashed in the desert near Kingman, Arizona, and that the military had quickly swooped in to cover it up. Arthur Stansel, a mechanical engineer working for the Air Force at the time, claimed that he was part of a team that was rushed to the crash site to investigate and recover the debris. He described seeing a small disc-shaped craft partially buried in the ground. It was made of a shiny metallic material, and there were no visible seams or rivets, which made it look like it was molded from a single piece of metal. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, and he also claimed to have seen the body of a creature being held in a tent next to the crashed aircraft, stating he saw, quote, the dead body of a 4-foot human-like creature in a silver metallic suit. The skin on its face was dark brown. And of course, this was all covered up, with the material being loaded onto trucks and transported to an undisclosed location.
I have to say, I love a good whistleblower moment, especially when the whistleblowing is being done by military veterans in open court, and it's regarding the evidence of little green men. What a time to be alive. In July of 2023, 3 military veterans testified in a Congress hearing about UFOs and claimed that the United States government had been operating a secret UFO reverse engineering program for at least the past few decades. Claims were also made that the United States did in fact recover non-human biologics from certain alleged crash sites. Of course, the veterans were unable to go into extensive detail about the missions and operations that led to the discoveries and projects involving UFOs because they are obviously classified. But the simple act of the 3 men, Ryan Graves, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, David Grush, retired Air Force Major, and David Fravor, retired Navy Commander, openly admitting to the existence of both UFOs, alien life forms, and secret government programs regarding the two in open court, it's pretty huge.
On November 9th of 1974 in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, 3 teenage boys reported seeing a glowing object streaking across the sky before crashing into a nearby pond. They described the object as round and emitting a strange light, which continued to glow even after it hit the water. People started showing up at the scene, gawking at this mysterious object in the pond, and as word spread, more and more people gathered, and soon local police and fire departments arrived on scene. Witnesses claimed they saw them retrieve a small metallic object, which was then covered and taken away on a truck. Official explanations later claimed that this object was just a railroad lantern that had been thrown into the pond, but some weren't so convinced, and even today people still wonder if something more mysterious had actually plummeted into the water that night.
Prior to 1967, Shag Harbor, located at the southern tip of Nova Scotia, Canada, was a pretty understated fishing village. And then a UFO came to town. On October 4th, around 11:20 p.m., residents of Shag Harbor watched as a mysterious object descended from the sky and crash landed on the water. Witnesses claimed that the craft had 3 to 4 glowing orange lights and that it was about 60 feet in length. After landing in the water, the lights began to dim until eventually all that was left was a yellowish foam, indicating that the craft had either moved too distant to be seen or that it had sunken into the icy waters of Shag Harbor. Authorities searched the area until about 3 a.m., but nothing was ever found, nor has it been to this day. Although it was confirmed that the object was not a civilian or military aircraft, all of those had been accounted for. The day after the incident, the Rescue Coordination Center filed a report with Canadian Forces headquarters claiming that something had in fact touched down in the waters of Shag Harbor and that it was of unknown origin. As I said, to this day, the object has yet to be recovered. Maybe we'll get lucky this year.
On April 18, 1962, people across multiple states witnessed something flying through the sky, which eventually crashed near the Nellis Air Force Base outside Las Vegas. The object was tracked by NORAD, which made its way across 10 US states. The object was described as a bright red or blue fireball. It was first seen on the East Coast just outside of Syracuse. Things got even stranger when the object apparently landed at one point. An Air Force spokesman said the object was on the ground for about 42 minutes and that during this time a nearby power station mysteriously lost all power. As soon as the object took off again, the power was restored. The Air Force sent out jets which pursued it across the country. Then over the Mesquite Range in Nevada, the UFO exploded in a brilliant glare that was so bright it was visible over 5 states. What makes this case so incredible is the number of witnesses. Having crossed from the East Coast to the West Coast, the UFO was seen by thousands of people. But was it just a meteor or was it something else? That whole part about it landing and then cutting off power, that's very strange. That has not been explained.
Starting off our list today, we have a 2018 UFO sighting that took place in the skies above North Carolina. Shout out to anyone watching from Elon University. In August of 2018, a man named Javion Hill claims to have spotted a UFO while driving home on US 74 just southwest of Charlotte. He described seeing lights in the clouds above him, shaped like a square. Immediately, he pulled out his phone and began snapping photos, which I have to admit are pretty convincing. After hovering in the sky above Javion for a good amount of time, the illuminated formation just vanished into thin air, as they do. You know how it is. It was as though it had never existed in the first place, but of course it did because there's proof, and we've seen it. And Hill, who says he was never a believer in aliens before that night, claims that during the time in which the object was hovering above him, he was seriously concerned for his safety.
On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, saw something in the sky near Mount Rainier in Washington. Something that he couldn't quite explain. He described 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation. What really caught his attention was how fast these things were moving, at around 1,700 miles per hour, which was faster than any known aircraft at the time. And when Arnold reported what he saw, it ended up getting massive media coverage. The Kenneth Arnold sighting is often referenced as the first big UFO encounter in modern times. After Arnold's sighting, lots of other reports started coming in about strange things in the sky across the United States. The government and military were getting intrigued, and the US Air Force started Project Sign, which was the first official government investigation into UFOs. This later became Project Blue Book, which looked into thousands of UFO sightings to try and figure out what was going on. So is it just one of these cases where he saw something and then everybody else started like getting excited and, just thought they were seeing things? Or was this just the time where UFOs and aliens were starting to come down to investigate things here on Earth?
Next up, we have 2 commercial pilots on different aircrafts claiming to have seen a mysterious flying object in the sky while flying above Arizona on February 24th of 2018. The first pilot to spot the UFO called into radio traffic control to ask if another plane had passed by him. The controller answered no, and then went on to make a joke about the pilot having possibly seen a UFO. Ground control then contacted another pilot flying an American Airlines flight a little bit behind the first plane, and asked the pilot to inform the control center if an aircraft were to pass over the plane. And a short while later, the pilot did exactly that. He said that a fast object had flown 3,000 feet over his plane in the opposite direction of which he was going. Once again, ground control had no knowledge of the aircraft, and it didn't show up on any of the radars either. Both pilots later described the objects as illuminated and incredibly fast, saying that they were nothing like the weather balloons they had seen sometimes floating at that altitude before. Plus, there were no records of this object, so what could it have been? Well, a UFO, duh.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was the lead investigator of Project Blue Book in the 50s. His job was to investigate reports of UFOs and find any possible explanation for them. Of course, if there was none, it would be categorized as a genuine UFO. French had shot down a lot of UFO reports over the course of his career, but in 1952, he witnessed something himself, something he could only describe as a genuine alien encounter. He kept what he'd seen a secret for decades. It wasn't until 2013 that he testified before 6 former members of Congress in DC, describing an event that happened back in 1952. A number of residents off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, had reported spotting 2 unidentified flying objects. So French was tasked with heading over to Canada to basically debunk it. The UFOs had crashed into the water, and when Lieutenant Colonel French arrived, he saw this crowd of about 100 people, including some police, standing by a wharf, gawking at something in the water. French made his way over, and when he looked down into the clear water below, he saw what looked like 2 large circular aircraft-like objects, and there were apparently 2 beings working on them. French described the creatures as, quote, 2 to 3 feet tall, light gray in color, very thin, long arms with either 2 or 3 fingers, the top of their heads much wider than their jawline. Their eyes were very slanted, and you couldn't see pupils in them. He then described the objects slowly rising out from the water before abruptly accelerating and taking off into the sky.
Next up, we have the very first record of a UFO encounter to take place in New England, USA, which I bet you didn't know was actually a major hotspot for extraterrestrial UFO and UAP activity. That's unidentified aerial phenomena, for those of you who don't know. The first recorded sighting happened in Boston, New England, and it was also the first ever documented sighting in the US as a whole. It took place in 1639, and credible reports have been popping up ever since. The record was a second-hand observation recorded by colony founder and governor at the time, John Winthrop, who wrote that a sober, discreet man had seen the sky above Boston become illuminated by a green light while he was rowing his boat along the river one evening. The light was still for a moment and appeared to be flaming, and then it morphed its shape and darted off into the night sky towards Charlestown. The encounter lasted for 3 hours, with the object in the sky going higher into the air and then rushing down closer to Earth again and again, back and forth. By the time it ended, which it did when the object just disappeared into the night, the man along with his boatmates had traveled 1 mile upstream with absolutely no memory of how they had gotten there.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have exoplanets. One of the first things spoken about in the 12-minute long anonymous video is that around 25 years ago, we didn't know that planets existed outside of our solar system. While that seems hard to believe, that is actually basically true, keeping in mind that this video was released in 2017. The first exoplanets, which are what planets outside of our solar system are called, were discovered in 1992, which is super recently. The video then goes on to explain that today we have found over 3,400 exoplanets that orbit other suns. This may seem redundant or unimportant, but this is a really important part of our search for alien life. With the vastness of space, there are so many places that need to be searched, so we have to find some place to start, and these planets are the perfect place. It is entirely possible that alien life may thrive off of entirely different things than life as we know it. The things we need to survive might be detrimental to alien life, but how are we supposed to know that when we don't know any aliens? This is why we started our search by looking for places with conditions similar to Earth, which we now call habitable planets. Part of a habitable planet's requirements is that they are orbiting a star, but that they aren't too close or too far from it like we are with the sun. So what the video is trying to get across is that while 25 years ago we didn't know any, we now know of thousands of planets that might be holding some kind of alien life. While we haven't found the proof yet, we at least have a pretty stellar starting point. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dr. Brian O'Leary. One thing Anonymous mentioned in the video was an apparent quote from Dr. Brian O'Leary, who's a former NASA astronaut and Princeton physics professor. The video stated that he said that there is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been monitoring us for a very long time, and that their appearance is bizarre from any type of traditional materialistic Western point of view, and that these visitors use the technologies of consciousness, they use droids, they use co-rotating magnetic disks for their propulsion systems, which seems to be a common denominator of the UFO phenomenon. I obviously have no idea how I could possibly substantiate these claims, but they certainly are interesting regardless of what you personally believe. This could of course just be nonsense in order to stir up the masses, but it could also be someone who's finally telling us the truth, but we're all just too skeptical at this point to believe it. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of what Dr. O'Leary said. Do you think it's a hunk of baloney, or do you think that he just might be telling the truth? In our number 8 spot today, we have the FBI documents. Around the halfway mark, the person in the anonymous video begins to discuss some sort of FBI documents that are apparently unclassified, just sitting there on the website. The video claims that the documents suggest that we've not only been visited by aliens from space, but also beings from other dimensions. The video does explain that the document didn't originate from within the FBI, but rather from a university department head, but that the FBI treated the document with the utmost importance, which is certainly interesting. It's also very important to note, however, that this document was sent in 1947. I'm not sure if that makes the claims more or less likely or credible, but the timing of it definitely seems important. At at least to me. Well, this is one of those things that you have to draw your own conclusions from. In the video, it is mentioned that while we are arguing whether or not supposed UFO or alien sightings have really taken place here on Earth or in space, there are real instances of extraterrestrial beings visiting us, but we're just too focused on the debate to open our eyes and see for ourselves. In our number 7 spot today, we have esoteric matters. After the discussion of the FBI documents, there is a claim that these beings that have apparently been visiting us are coming not from a planet as we think of it, but rather some sort of etheric planet that interpenetrates with our own, but that we are unable to perceive. Apparently, if you're a student of esoteric matters, these concepts will make a lot more sense to you, or so this anonymous video claims. Apparently, these alien beings are able to make a conscious decision to enter our plane, and in that same respect, they're also to make a decision to disappear from our view. Apparently, they're visiting us as they are thinking about settling here on our plane, and that they are coming here peacefully. During these visits, they are also said to have technology that would destroy any sort of attack made on them, so it is advised that if they do make themselves visible to us, we do not attack or make them feel threatened. I'm not so sure about this one, but at the end of the day, I am certainly no student of esoteric matters, so maybe it's just something that my brain cannot comprehend with the knowledge I currently have. In our number 6 spot today, we have this UFO footage. This UFO footage is coming from another anonymous video which claims that real UFO footage is always censored, and that this video has been previously censored, but they were here to expose the truth. It is unclear where this UFO video was taken, and at the end of the day, I'm no expert in debunking these things, so it's tough to say whether or not it's real, but let's all just take a look and you can judge for yourselves. I know that wasn't the most exciting video, but what do we think aliens are going to be doing if they really are visiting us? What do you guys think? Do you guys think that this video is really showing some sort of UFO? And if you do you think it's aliens or just some sort of secret project that we aren't privy to?
This next one has to be the wildest alien encounter case in recent history. So in March of 2023, something strange went down in a small Bolivian village called Horania. It all started with reports of a mysterious green light hovering in the sky. People whipped out their phones to capture the event, having no idea what the hell they were looking at. But unlike a lot of your typical UFO cases, this one doesn't just end with people seeing something strange in the sky. Things get way weirder. So 2 days later, residents claimed to have seen tiny beings darting around the town at night. One villager, Rita Marquez, described them as little and almost like goblins. Some locals even claimed to have found one of these small creatures dead in a gutter one morning, only for its body to vanish soon after. So, a lot to unpack here. Strange lights, possible aircraft, little beings running around the streets at night, and even a mysterious disappearance of one of these dead creatures. I don't know what to make of this case. Whenever there's a whole bunch of witnesses like this, I find it very interesting though.
Next up, we have Barney and Betty Hill's extraterrestrial encounter, which took place on September 19th of 1961 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the couple claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The ordeal started when the pair saw a bright light in the sky around 10:30 p.m. while driving home after a night out. Betty asked Barney to stop the car so that they could get a better look. He did, and then pulled out a pair of binoculars. What they saw was a massive, oddly shaped spacecraft with multicolored lights. They tried to drive away, but the spaceship, which they believed to have been at least 40 feet long, followed them, getting closer and closer until it was hovering directly in front of the pair's car. Barney claims he was able to clearly make out 6 to 8 humanoid figures standing on the ship who instructed Barney and Betty not to move, but rather to just keep looking towards the ship. The next thing the pair remembered, they had driven 35 miles away from their destination with no recollection of doing so. They tried to write down as much as they could about the experience on their way home, but their memories quickly became fragmented. It wasn't until years later, under hypnosis, that the pair separately both recalled being taken onto the ship and then separated from one another and examined by the humanoid alien life forms. In the days after the incident, however, both Betty and Barney's watches stopped working, and Barney noticed tiny circles on the back of his truck, and when he put his compass near them, it went haywire. So I'm not saying they were telling the truth, but I think they might have been telling the truth.
This next story is very outlandish, but it's an entertaining story, and I haven't talked about it before, so here it goes. Back in 2021, Angelina Lynn Johnston held a news conference in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Johnston claims to be a former retired defense intelligence officer who had an encounter with various alien species at a secret base in the Mojave Desert. She claimed that in January of 2010, a few years before she ran as a Democrat candidate for South Dakota Senate, she had met up with a couple in South Carolina who ended up taking her to this secret base. She didn't provide details on exactly where the base was in the desert, but said that she would be taking an astronaut along with a few scientists to the base, which had been built into the side of a mountain. She described seeing various alien species, including one that looked a bit like a praying mantis type creature, and that the beings all spoke to her through telepathy.
Next up, we have the Exeter incident, which took place in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1965 and actually inspired a best-selling novel, Incident at Exeter: Unidentified Flying Objects Over America Now, by John G. Fuller. Not sponsored. One evening in Exeter, a police officer patrolling Highway Route 101 stopped to check on a woman parked on the side of the road. When he asked her what was wrong, she answered in breathless hysterics. She claimed that a large red flying object with flashing lights had been chasing her. Just a few hours later, the police heard a similar story from another man, a hitchhiker who claimed to have seen 5 bright lights in the sky while walking along Route 150. He told officers that they had been about 100 feet away from where he had stood, and he watched as they hovered over a home before moving over to the airspace above a large field, and then disappearing and reappearing several times. Curious, one of the policemen went with the hitchhiker back to the spot where he claimed to have seen the UFOs, and sure enough, there it was. And another officer arrived shortly after to see the exact same thing. 5 bright lights high up in the sky disappearing into and reappearing from the trees over and over again. And then, over the next few weeks, authorities in Exeter received almost 60 other reports of UFO sightings in the area. So, if you like aliens and UFOs and Exeter was not on your bucket list, you might want to rethink that decision.
Finally, we have a case where 3 UFOs hijacked a pilot's plane in midair. This is about as disturbing a close encounter as it gets, as this man just narrowly escaped death. The pilot's name is Carlos de los Santos. In 1975, he'd been flying back to Mexico City. It was just another routine flight until it wasn't. Carlos spotted something on his right wing. It was this silver disc-like object about 13 feet in length. It was just right on top of the wing. Then he saw an identical object on top of his left wing. And as if that wasn't enough, a third object appeared, and this one was heading straight for him. In a panic, Carlos tried to steer his plane away, but the controls weren't responding. Luckily, the object just missed him though. He frantically radioed air traffic control, explaining that he'd lost control and was surrounded by these strange disc objects. And then, to his complete and utter horror, the plane suddenly veered completely off course. It was now ascending higher and higher up into the sky. Carlos had absolutely no control over the plane now. But then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the strange objects flew away. And miraculously, thankfully, Carlos regained control of the aircraft.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Perseverance. A point that was made in the video is something that we are actually now watching happen in real time, and that is the mission to Mars for the Perseverance rover that is currently there digging around in the soil. The video stated that Mars may hold signs of an ancient environment that may have been favorable to microbial life. Well, that is exactly true, and the reason the rover is there at all. The Perseverance rover launched from Earth on July 30th, 2020 and made an incredible and successful landing on Mars on February 18th, 2021. 2021. While the rover has provided us with some incredible high-definition photos of the red planet, which truly are incredible to look at, its main objective is to dig around and search for ancient signs of life, collecting rock and soil samples for a possible return to Earth for further research. While Mars' thin atmosphere is unable to shield the planet from the high amounts of radiation coming from space now, it is thought that the atmosphere did once act as a better shield, and that the environment of Mars may have once been a great host for life, which is exactly why this mission is so important. While when the anonymous video was first released, we were still a ways away from the Perseverance mission taking place, it's really cool to see how it has come to fruition, and it's exciting to see the new photos and discoveries that are made each day. In our number 4 spot today we have UFO footage, part 2. We have to include just one more video of what is claimed to be proof of aliens visiting us on Earth before we get back into the more science-y top 3 points. This is another video that was uploaded by a member of Anonymous, and it comes from 2017. The video features a dark sky, but it shows what looks like some sort of aircraft with a few flashing lights, and it seems like it is able to basically just hover there. Not long after the video starts, another mysterious UFO seemingly joins the first one, and the two are just seen floating there. What do you guys think these could be? I obviously don't know what an alien aircraft would look like, so it's tough to say if this is a realistic example or not. All I know is that if this isn't someone playing a trick and they really saw this in the sky, I have no other possible explanations of what it could be. In our number 3 spot today we have TRAPPIST-1. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. One of the things Anonymous mentioned in the video was a nearby star called TRAPPIST-1. The video didn't go into too much detail about this, but I'm here to do that now so we can all know what they were talking about. While TRAPPIST-1 is a star, the revelation that the video spoke about was that this star has an entire solar system of Earth-like planets. This discovery first came in 2017, and upon further research, in 2018 it was revealed that some of the planets just may harbor even more water than Earth does. Some of the planets are a little too close to the star, so the water is more atmospheric water vapor. The ones in the middle have liquid water, like us, and the furthest ones have ice. TRAPPIST-1 is now the most thoroughly known planetary system apart from ours, which is kinda cool. While the Anonymous video made it seem like there was a full-blown advanced alien civilization living in this solar system, there still might be potential for some form of microbial life that we just haven't quite found yet. And that is very cool. In our number 2 spot today we have Enceladus. If you had heard of Enceladus before the Anonymous video, there's a good chance you knew it as basically an icy snowball floating around in space, or perhaps you simply knew it as a small moon of Saturn with a diameter of 502 kilometers, but as it turns out, this small moon might hold some pretty amazing potential. It was discovered that this moon has hydrothermal processes going on underneath its crust. To us non-scientists that means next to nothing, but what if I said that means that it just might have all of the requirements for life, and that it is becoming a greater possibility that we might find microbial life there. Basically, this moon has an icy shell for a surface and then a rocky interior, but between those two layers is a warm ocean, and this ocean is where scientists think the life is most likely to be. This discovery came almost accidentally when the Cassini orbiter arrived to Saturn in 2005, and it found water plumes shooting out of the cracks in the surface of the moon, which made scientists realize that it just may be geologically active. Through more research and by flying the orbiter through the water, by the time 2015 rolled around, scientists knew that it was holding all of the keys to life. While this little moon was never the original focus of research, it quickly took over with its incredibly exciting potential. In our number 1 spot today we have Europa. We've got another moon to talk about that was mentioned in the video that also just might be holding the keys to us finding alien life, but this time we're taking it over to Jupiter and its icy moon Europa. Europa has been a point of interest for a while after NASA's Galileo Jupiter probe in the 1990s revealed an unusually warm spot in Europa's cold surface. In March of 2014, the Hubble telescope detected what scientists thought might be a plume of water vapor, but the caution turned to cautious excitement and optimism in February of 2016 when the telescope caught another, much larger plume in the same spot. This has led to the creation of the Europa Clipper mission. While this mission doesn't yet have a set date, it will see an orbiter flying to Europa to fly through these plumes in an attempt to see what they are made out of, similar to the one we just talked about, to see if it really is holding the key to life, or maybe even life itself. One of the scientists on the Clipper mission, Robert Pappalardo, explained that if there is life on Europa, it almost certainly was completely independent from the origin of life on Earth. That would mean the origin of life must be pretty easy throughout the galaxy and beyond.
The first image is a screen grab from a video filmed by a US Marine officer on the 20th of April in 2021 on a military base in 29 Palms, California. After the release of the photograph, multiple Marines came forward to confirm the existence of an aircraft, saying that while the photo showcases only the triangle-shaped formation of bright lights, in person the men were able to make out the black body of the aircraft as well. The unidentified flying object is said to have hovered for 10 minutes in the air before it suddenly vanished without any trace. The men were able to rule out flares for being the cause of the mysterious lights, but were never able to figure out exactly what they saw that night. However, it appears the footage has not been taken lightly, as the Pentagon has started an investigation into just what exactly was seen on the night of April 20th of 2021 in the skies above the 29 Palms military base. Next up, we have a series of photographs taken by cosmonaut Ivan Vanger in August of 2020 whilst aboard the International Space Station that appears to depict 5 unidentified flying objects flying at the same speed while maintaining the same distance between each other as well as their surroundings, moving in a straight line just above the Earth's curved horizon visible in the night sky. Vangar, both surprised and curious, took to Twitter, now named X, to share the footage in hopes of getting some clarity as to exactly what he was looking at. In an exciting unfolding of events, his tweet was picked up by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, and a spokesperson revealed that experts were in fact studying the video in an attempt to determine what exactly Vangar had managed to capture. Did you guys know that Japan was a major hotbed for UFO activity? Because I didn't. But apparently the Pentagon does? In fact, UFO sightings are so common in Japan that its military has reportedly ordered all pilots to disclose any and all identified flying objects directly to the Japanese government. Not only that, but Japanese self-defense forces have also undergone extensive training in relation to UFO sighting protocol. To date, 6 alleged encounters between pilots and UFOs have been reported to the Japanese government, one of which was recorded, and depicts 10 white circular balls flying through the skies of Osaka in Japan. While the government has yet to publicly comment on any of the incidents, the update of self-defense protocol alone is pretty telling. The next image was shared by a pretty reputable source, National Geographic. The image was captured by Sergio Loaiza on September 4th of 1971 during an aerial survey of Lake Cote. Everything seemed pretty normal until the photos were taken back to Loaiza's development lab, where he noticed something very strange. A metallic flying aircraft, estimated to have a diameter of 160 feet, was located in the corner of one of the photographs. When he presented the photos to his superiors at the National Geographic Institute, they shut him down quick, forbidding Sergio as well as his colleagues from sharing any information of what they had seen that day. In 1979, however, the photograph was leaked, and the object that appeared in the image was officially classified as an unidentified flying object. In 2021, the existence of the object was again confirmed after the original copy of the photograph was scanned, and it was revealed that the UFO's presence was more than just a scratch on the lens or a piece of dust in the wind. So what do you think it was? Let us know in the comments. The Sumerian people, the earliest known civilization who lived in ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia, are incredibly fascinating and confusing. It is believed that the civilization resided in Sumer, which is now southern Iraq, sometime between 4500 and 4000 BC, after arriving from the south, having traveled through the Persian Gulf. Early settlers were experts in farming, raising cattle, weaving textiles, carpentry, pottery, and even brewing beer. By the year 3000 BC, the population had become incredibly advanced, building massive pyramid-like structures long before the ancient Egyptians. And by 2800 BC, the civilization reached its peak population, somewhere between 40 to 80,000 people living within the city's 6 miles of definitive walls. It is believed that the Sumerian civilization invented pyramids, the wheel, script, arithmetic, geometry, irrigation, saws and other tools, candles, chariots, harpoons, and beer. It is also believed by some that the reason this civilization was so advanced is because of their interactions with aliens. Interactions many claim to be depicted in the Summer's Triumph Tapestry, which was created in 1538 in the Flemish region of Belgium. If you look closely, you can see what appear to be UFOs depicted in the skies above the Sumerian people. Coincidence? Perhaps, or maybe something else entirely. If it is true that the ancient Sumerians got help from extraterrestrial beings, it is safe to say that not only did aliens alter our reality, they actually had a hand in creating it entirely, as the ancient Sumerians are often credited with creating the building blocks that shaped modern society as we know it today.
This has become a pretty famous photograph. The strange figure in the photo has been dubbed the Ilkley Moor creature. On December 1st, 1987, a former police officer going by the pseudonym Philip Spencer was on a morning walk in Ilkley Moor in West Yorkshire, England, when he spotted a strange creature standing on a hillside next to the road. He'd managed to snap a picture of it before it ran off. Spencer chased after it, but it disappeared into the brush. It was then that he witnessed a large disc-like object fly into the sky. It made a loud humming noise, almost like a helicopter. Whatever this thing was, though, it wasn't a chopper. It was whitish in color and consisted of two saucer shapes stacked on top of one another and took off at an incredible speed. Spencer headed back home and was horrified to realize that nearly 3 hours had gone by that were completely unaccounted for.
How's this for an alien encounter? On December 29th of 2012, a fireball appeared over the skies of Sri Lanka. A fireball that was later determined to have been a meteorite. A meteorite that scientists confirmed contained genuine alien fossils. Now before you quit your job and go scream "I told you so" at your wife, I should probably clarify that when I say alien fossils, I don't mean bones or anything like that. I'm talking about microfossils and algae that, according to Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe and researchers from the Jamie Wallace Cardiff School of Mathematics, are not of terrestrial origin, meaning that the fossils and algae found inside of the meteorites were one of the first confirmed signs of alien life in recorded history. Perhaps the most exciting thing about this discovery, other than proving the existence of life outside of Earth, is that it provides compelling evidence of panspermia, the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe and is spread to different planets by meteors and other solid space debris. An interesting theory that may very well provide us with the answer of how humans ended up on Earth in the first place and why many depictions of aliens are described as humanoid. I mean, if we all evolved from the same thing, it makes sense that we would kind of look alike, right?
On the morning of March 30th, 1988, Helen Thomas and her mom Carol set out for their usual walk to work at the local mill. They took the same route they always did, but on this particular morning, things would take a strange turn. Out of nowhere, they heard a low humming sound above them. Before they could make sense of it, a super bright light beamed down, blinding them completely. When the light finally vanished, Helen and Carol found themselves feeling dizzy and nauseous, and Helen's leather jacket was soaking wet, but the ground around them was completely dry. They were pretty shaken, but continued on to work anyway. When they arrived, though, the security guard told them they were hours late. In the days that followed, both women started developing blisters and rashes. It wasn't until years later that they reached out to Tony Dodd, a well-known UFO researcher. Under hypnosis, they revealed some unsettling details. They remembered being in a bright room, lying on tables with a weird net-like material holding them down as strange creatures with big heads and dark eyes performed bizarre experiments on them, even taking eggs from their bodies with a thin tube. One odd memory stood out as well. One of the aliens seemed fascinated by Helen's leather jacket, rubbing it on his face and hands until it was soaking wet. Gross. Now, hypnosis, I'm always a little iffy about that, but the initial story of them being late for work after seeing the strange light and everything, that's all still very, very strange.
The glorification of Eucharist, or the Disputa of Eucharist as it's known in Italian, is a religious artwork painted in the 16th century by an Italian painter named Ventura Salimbeni. If you start from the bottom and work your way up, the piece starts off relatively normal, depicting a number of religious authorities gathered around an altar. But as your gaze meets the top of the painting, things get a little more interesting. The Holy Trinity, God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit, represented by a white dove, are shown sitting in the clouds, which would be all good and well and by the Holy Book if it weren't for the fact that it appears as though Jesus and God are being separated by some kind of large, spheric, metallic, ancient space satellite with telescopic antennas, a light at the top center, and a dial on the bottom left. While the depiction of the satellite has been highly debated, with many religious experts claiming that the orb is a representation of the universe, the light and dial the sun and moon, and the antennas scepter wands, many others claim that the glorification of the Eucharist is in fact proof of alien life and their influence on humanity. Or at the very least, this painting could prove the existence of time travel. Next up, we have footage that comes to us straight from the declassifieds. Remember how I told you at the beginning of the video that the government quite literally copped to the fact that they have been hiding the existence of UFOs for years? Well, they did, and they came with receipts. On the 15th of January in 2023, while surveilling an MQ-9 Reaper aircraft, an unidentified aerial presence was captured moving at speeds unreachable by any of Earth's modern-day technological advances. Not only this, but as the object whizzed through the field of view of the camera lens, it appeared to leave behind an atmospheric wake before disappearing completely into the sky. Guys, if you have any, please leave your UFO and alien stories in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with any of these kind of things. Next up, we have arguably the most beautiful alien-assuming photograph I have ever seen. The photo was taken in 2004 by a retired Royal Air Force officer while on vacation in Sri Lanka. The sight was described as some kind of colorful giant donut in the sky with hues of oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. After its capture, the photograph was turned into the Royal Air Force Flying Dales Base in North Yorkshire in England, where it became a classified document held by the Ministry of Defense. The image has since been declassified, of course, and is now available for public viewing, but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the photo as well as the photographer, as his identity, along with any other information regarding the incident, is pretty much non-existent. I mean, come on, it's a giant glowing light in the sky. You're really telling me no one else saw this and that there's no other information out there other than the fact that the photo exists? Oh, yeah, and not only that, but it was deemed classified by the British Ministry of Defense, so I'm thinking there's something else going on here. Okay, I bet you didn't know that another major hotbed for extraterrestrial, UFO, and unidentified aerial phenomenon activity was Brazil. I mean, I did, but maybe you didn't. In fact, this kind of thing is so popular in Brazil that they have an annual day of recognition for these sightings known as the Night of the UFO, which came to be after a major event took place in 1986. On the night of May 19th, a series of unidentified flying objects were seen in the skies of Brazil, and even more non-visual objects were detected via radar across the skies of 4 Brazilian states. Of course, at this time, any and all knowledge the government had on the event was extremely classified. In May of 2012, however, Brazil's Freedom of Information Act went into place, after which the public demanded the release of all the documents relating to the incident. The government complied, and not only released written documents of the events, but also a series of photographs depicting strange activity within the skies above Brazil. Although the images of what appeared to be nothing more than squiggles and clouds of smoke didn't provide much clarity, a statement made by the Minister of Aeronautics did. He said, "This command is of the opinion that the phenomena are solid and reflect, in a certain way, intelligence, due to the ability to follow and maintain a distance from observers, as well as to fly information." After this statement was made, the Brazilian government has still not been able to confirm exactly what took place the day the Night of the UFOs was born. Next, we have a photo taken in 1990 by 2 Scottish chefs who were working in a hotel near the area in which the photograph was taken. After a long day of work, it appears the 2 men had decided to take a hike in an attempt to blow off some steam. While this walk wouldn't end up being incredibly relaxing, it would be wildly exciting, as not long after the 2 men had set off on their journey along the Calvine Scottish countryside, they noticed something hovering above them in the sky. The object was not one that either of the men could identify, identify, and so they pulled out their cameras in an attempt to document the 100-foot flying aircraft instead. The photos, which have been analyzed and show no signs of manipulation, capture the object being circled by a jet plane. They thought the incident was incredibly strange and even newsworthy, so the two turned the footage over to the local newspaper for publication, but the images were seized by the British Ministry of Defense and were never released. Until 32 years later, that is, by David Clark, who, unbeknownst to the ministry, had kept a photocopy of one of the original images. The identity of the two men was never revealed, nor did they ever come forward to share their story after the images had been seized by the ministry, begging the question of what exactly they saw and what exactly the government was trying to cover up. A photograph taken of an unidentified aircraft lit up by military spotlights in Los Angeles, California, is next on the list. The photograph, which documents an event so big it later became referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, was taken on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the night the photo was taken, all of Los Angeles was under blackout, as directed by the US military. While the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above had been lit up by a myriad of strange objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers stood absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition appeared to have no effect on the unidentified flying object. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. Furthermore, 3 were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. And finally, we have a handful of screen grabs from a video taken by Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich whilst flying an 18F Super Hornet fighter jet over the Pacific Ocean near San Diego during a training mission for the United States Navy. The footage, taken in November of 2004, was captured after Dietrich was asked to investigate a suspicious object that had been seen dropping from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean and then vanishing. When Alex and their colleague arrived on the scene, the ocean's surface, where the object had been reported, appeared as though it was boiling. Moments after arriving to investigate, a strange, elongated white object came into view and was captured on video hovering above the water before it disappeared into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving no wake in the oceans below. While the footage has been confirmed to be authentic by the United States Department of Defense, the object itself, along with its origins, remains a mystery.
The Lizard Man. This next one is a full-on encounter with a reptilian being in Scape Ore Swamp, South Carolina. Usually anything close to an alien sighting is a UFO, and those are just unidentified flying objects. We really don't know if they have anything to do with extraterrestrials at all. But a humanoid reptilian or lizard-like creature, that sounds pretty alien to me. There is said to be a strange creature stalking the swamplands of Lee County, South Carolina, that being a big 7-foot-tall lizard man. On the 14th of July, 1988, sheriffs of Lee County were called to inspect damage done to a vehicle parked outside a home right next to the Scape Ore Swamp. Then a young man named Christopher Davis came out to make his own report to the police, saying that just 2 weeks prior, his car had also been damaged, only he'd actually seen the person, or rather the thing, that was responsible. Christopher described an encounter with a massive 7-foot-tall creature with 3 fingers per hand, red eyes, and green, wet, scaly skin. He'd been driving home from work one night when he got a flat tire. He'd gotten out of his car to fix it when he saw the thing making its way towards him. He jumped in his car and keeled off, but the creature was so fast that it managed to catch up to his speeding vehicle. Then it hopped onto the roof, scratching at it. Christopher hit the brakes, causing the thing to fly off his car before making his escape. When news of this report hit the papers, it caused a frenzy. More and more reports started coming in. The local radio station offered a $1 million reward to whoever could catch the beast, so hunters even started flocking to town to try and catch it. But reports began to die down by the end of the summer, and local sheriffs began writing off the supposed encounters as, get this, bear sightings. Because if there are 2 things that look so eerily similar, it's definitely a furry bear and a big green scaly lizard monster with red eyes and no hair to speak of.
In 2008, a strange piece of machinery was discovered in a mine in Vladivostok, Russia. It looked like a piece of tooth wheel, kind of like what you would see on modern-day gear-operated machinery. The object had been found embedded in a piece of coal. The man who discovered the object became curious about its origin, and so he showed it to a group of scientists who determined it to be 1. Man-made, constructed out of almost pure aluminum, and 2. Almost 300 million years old. 2 conclusions that raised countless questions. 1. How did the object come to be? Because aluminum of such purity and shape are not found naturally. And as far as we once know, humans didn't figure out how to make anything close to this object until 1825. Of course, this has led many people to believe that the piece is a mechanism that somehow broke off of an alien spaceship. On the other hand, scientists aren't so sure, but with no other explanation of how it came to be, it's definitely a possibility.
In October of 1974, John Day was on the way back home to Essex with his family. The journey should have only taken about half an hour, but as he and his wife Susan were putting their kids to bed, they realized that they'd arrived home much later than they'd expected. An extra 3 hours had gone by. Over the next few days, the whole family started having terrifying nightmares, being sucked up into a strange craft before being operated on. John and Susan felt constantly anxious and confused. And not knowing what to do, John reached out to a local UFO group for advice. They suggested he talk to Leonard Wilder, a hypnotist experienced in cases of missing time. Under this hypnosis, John recalled driving into a weird bright mist that seemed to fall from the sky. He remembered seeing a bright light descending into a nearby field, then shooting towards their car. Before he knew it, the car was lifted into the sky. He then remembered being poked by sharp instruments. He also described the spaceship having furniture that was molded into the walls with no seams or joins. And the next thing he knew, they were back in their car driving up the driveway. Suffice to say, the whole experience left them with more questions than answers.
In 1998, an electrical engineer named John J. William discovered a strange piece of metal coming out of the dirt, and so he dug it up. What he had discovered was a rock with 3 metal prongs sticking out of it. It looked somehow man-made and appeared to contain some sort of electrical component. Williams later claimed that that electrical component embedded in the stone was not glued or welded inside to the granite rock surrounding it, meaning that while it appeared to be man-made, because electrical components don't just naturally exist inside of rocks, it was something else entirely. Furthermore, the rock was later dated to be at least 100,000 years old. Fast forward to today, and Williams is open to having others research the strange discovery, but he does have a few conditions. 1, he must be present for whatever discovery is made, and 2, the rock must remain unharmed. Even with these parameters, you would think that by using modern-day tools and technology, we would have been able to get an answer as to what exactly the rock is by now, but no such discovery has been made, leading people to believe that the object must not have originated on Earth and is therefore proof of ancient extraterrestrial presence on our planet. It's possible. Anything's possible.
In 2004, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, 2 Navy pilots, were out doing a routine training exercise off the coast of San Diego when things took a weird turn. They got a call from an operator back at base who told them there was something odd in their airspace. This wasn't just a blip on the radar either. Apparently, the military had been tracking this unidentified flying object for weeks. It would do strange things like dive suddenly or just hover in place, and the operator asked Fravor and Slate to go check it out and see if they could get a visual on whatever this thing was. And sure enough, after searching the skies for a bit, they finally spotted it. According to their reports, the UFO was about 40 feet long and was hovering roughly 50 feet above the ocean. Fravor decided to get a closer look and started descending towards the UFO, but just as he was getting closer, the thing rose to meet him before zipping away at a speed he couldn't even begin to match. And Fravor later said to reporters, "I can tell you, I think it was not from this world.
According to the Pentagon, the project never actually went ahead due to the fact that the government was unable to collect any kind of otherworldly spacecrafts. Sure. The document showed that the budget for the program was to be 12 to 15 million in the first year, 25 million in the second, and upwards of 50 million US dollars in the third. And the purpose of the project was to ensure national security by accessing and assessing the advanced technology and determining its threat capabilities. Furthermore, the document stated that another drive for the program was the United States' fear that either China or Russia had possibly already been able to reverse engineer these kind of technologies. Despite all of the information released to the public meticulously outlining the project, Homeland Security stands firm on their claim that the program never actually went ahead because it was never actually approved. Personally, I'm not buying it. It sounds more like a foreign enemy was getting too close to uncovering the mission, and so the government released a bogus declassified statement saying that while there was a project, it never actually went ahead, in order to throw them off the scent. If you agree, consider giving this video a thumbs up. Why not, you guys?
Project Sign. Project Sign was an early US military investigation into unidentified flying objects launched in 1948 after a surge in reported sightings. Everything really kicked off with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, followed by the Roswell incident, and then people were spotting UFOs all over the country. So it was time to investigate these reports and assess whether there was a real threat to national security, especially being that it was the Cold War, of course. The team included experts in astronomy, physics, and psychology, all tasked with analyzing UFO reports and data. Sign was a top secret for most of its operation, but in 1949 some of their findings went public and it was pretty intriguing. Basically, they concluded that a small percentage of UFO sightings couldn't be easily explained away by natural phenomena or known aircraft. So this led some members to hypothesize that UFOs might be of extraterrestrial origin. But right around this time, the project was shut down by General Hoyt Vandenberg, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. It was then replaced by Project Grudge, with a slightly different goal, but more on that in a bit. First, let's kick it over to
a joint effort between the National Security Agency of the United States, aka the NSA, and the British intelligence agencies dedicated to training super soldiers in charge of UFO retrieval and security lockdown operations. I have to say, my interest is piqued. Project Mannequin, as it's called, was revealed to the public back in the 2000s by several whistleblowers who claim to have been a part of the project at one point or another. Now, while super soldiers in charge of subduing alien threats does sound pretty cool, unfortunately the recruitment process sounds pretty dark. Apparently agents don't just join the team of their own accord, instead hand over their offspring to the government at a young age for some kind of crazy undisclosed amount of money. According to whistleblower reports, the base for Project Mannequin is located in a top secret facility 60 meters underground in Berkshire in southern England, and this is where the soldiers are trained to become some of the most skilled individuals in the world. Now, because I already know you're going to ask, the most famous whistleblower of Project Mannequin was Max Spears, who, after leaking information regarding the project to the public, died under incredibly strange and unexplicable circumstances. Unexplicable as in one moment he sat down on his couch and the very next moment he was dead, and to this day no one knows how it happened, but he believed prior to his death that he was a sleeper agent that had been brainwashed by the government and was involuntarily part of this project. So who knows?
In 1949, Project Sign was replaced with Project Grudge. But now things were different. Their goal wasn't just to assess UFO reports and figure out if they were legitimate. Instead, the purpose was to downplay the presence of UFOs. At the time, the US government was worried that foreign governments could exploit UFO reports, basically causing panic in the public. So Grudge shifted its focus from scientific investigation to straight up debunking UFO reports and reassuring the public that there was nothing extraordinary about the sightings, even when there actually was. J. Allen Hynek, a famous American astronomer, professor, and UFOologist, took issue with Grudge, claiming that it was, quote, less science and more of a public relations campaign, which it was, at least on the surface. Just because they were telling the public UFO sightings were nothing more than balloons, meteors, or optical illusions doesn't mean they were doing research behind the scenes that they felt it best to cover up.
Project Moondust is officially described as a United States project dedicated to recovering the remains of Soviet satellites that re-entered the atmosphere and crashed down to Earth in not only the US but also South Africa, Bolivia, and even the Himalayan mountains. Unofficially, it is possible that the project is actually dedicated to something far more interesting. You know where I'm going with this. The collection and analysis of crashed UFOs. It is believed that while the US claimed to have been recovering satellites, they were actually collecting UFOs, which were then sent out to various military bases throughout the states. The entire thing was revealed by a man named Clifford Stone, who claimed to have been part of the project. Just before his death, he was quoted saying that the entire time the project was going on, they were telling the American public that it had nothing to do with aliens, when in reality, high clearance personnel who were not army officials would always be added to the mission last minute, and they would be the ones to claim ownership of whatever objects were recovered during the mission. These objects were then sent out for testing, analysis, and reverse engineering.
And we're going to start things off with Point Dume underwater base. So off the coast of Point Dume in Malibu, there seems to be this mysterious structure lying about 6 miles underwater. Images captured on Google Earth show an oval-shaped object resting on the seabed floor. Looks like it has a large flat top and what seems to be pillars or columns. Looking at it, it definitely looks like the entrance to something. It sits about 2,000 feet beneath the ocean surface, spanning nearly 3 miles in width, and some speculate that it could be more than just a naturally formed structure. And yes, some even think it could be an underwater alien base. Jimmy Church, who hosts a California-based radio show called Fade to Black, was pretty excited about the images, stating, "My first impression was that it was Greek. It looked artificial and didn't look natural. When you're looking at it from above, it's a nearly perfect oval shape. In the natural surroundings, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is eroded and covered in rocks and sloping and peaking, and right here for 2 miles, it is a perfect oval with a black separation or outline to it. It just stands out that it has to be some type of roof. It's not unlike a dome stadium or a covered indoor racetrack or an Olympic arena. It's got that feel to it. It looks like a perfect oval man-made structure sitting on a construction site." Next up, we have the Solomon Islands UFOs. There have been some very strange things said to go on here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and not only have locals claimed to see strange lights in the sky, but also coming up from under the water as well, which has led to a pretty intense theory that there could be an underwater alien base there. There have always been local legends of monstrous giants on the islands, 10-foot tall, hairy creatures with flat noses and glowing red eyes. That, combined with the reports of strange lights in the sky, moving with incredible speed and agility, could mean there may be some kind of connection here. You see, some of these lights and strange flying objects have been seen descending down into the trees of the Guadalcanal or rising up from the ocean and zipping around before diving back down. There are also legends that these giants that are said to live on the island move around through subterranean tunnels. So some speculate that beneath the surface of the ocean is this hidden structure where extraterrestrial beings may be conducting their activities. Next up, we have Hy-Brasil, a small mythological island off the coast of Ireland. According to Celtic folklore, this island is said to lie off the west coast of the country, appearing only every 7 years, usually surrounded by mist. The island is often described as a paradise with advanced technology and a society living in total harmony with nature. Sailors and explorers have reported spotting the island for centuries, claiming to have seen strange creatures and these glowing god-like beings there. Maps from the 14th to the 19th centuries often included Hy-Brasil, but its exact location was always a bit of a mystery. Now, of course, it sounds like complete folklore, which Celtic culture is absolutely full of, but what if there's something else going on here? Well, some have suggested that the island's appearing and disappearing could have an extraterrestrial connection. The idea is that aliens could be using advanced cloaking technology or have a hidden base on or beneath the island, and the mysterious creatures that some sailors claimed to have seen on the island do sound like they could be alien-like, but it's still a total mystery as to what they'd be doing over there. Next up on the list, we have strange skulls that were found in an underwater cave in Mexico. So in 2012, divers were exploring a cenote in the Yucatan Peninsula where they came across two chambers full of human bones, and some of these bones were human skulls, but there was something off about them. They were elongated. Now, the ancient Maya were said to have performed human sacrifices in the area, and skull deformation was also practiced in various parts of Mexico way back when. There are theories as to why, but nothing entirely concrete. One idea is that high-ranking members of society had elongated skulls. Some say that people's skulls were elongated just to differentiate certain groups from one another, but there's also the theory that these skulls never belonged to human beings at all. Pretty common knowledge, of course, that there are tons of conspiracy theories surrounding the ancient Maya, including the presence of extraterrestrials that may have helped them construct all their intricate advanced cities. So could these skulls have belonged to these supposed alien beings? It's possible. Next up, we have the Lake Baikal incident. So this lake in southern Siberia is the world's largest freshwater lake by volume. It's incredibly deep, and there are some pretty eerie stories about it. First of all, there's all the mysterious lights that are reported, not just hovering or flying above it, but also coming from the depths of the water. And there's a very creepy story that was supposedly an attempted cover-up by the Russian government. So in 1982, a team of Navy divers were doing a routine diving exercise in the lake when a number of them started spotting something pretty disturbing. There were all these figures deep under the water. They were tall and slender, well over 6 feet tall, and wearing what looked to be silver suits. Those suits could have also been silvery scales. They also had large, circular, glowing, unblinking eyes. The creatures began chasing after the divers, or swimming after them, rather, and the divers panicked and then swam back up to the surface, and they reported what they'd seen to their superiors, but that's where the story ends. The existence of the strange creatures has never been confirmed or denied. Next up, we have underwater alien bases in Alaska. So claims of alleged alien bases lurking beneath the waters off the coast of Alaska have been around for quite a while, but in recent years, the idea of them has become more of a popular thing, mostly thanks to ancient aliens. Thank you, ancient aliens. But apparently, there are even eyewitness accounts dating back several decades, which have been mostly undisclosed until recently. UFOologists and UFO enthusiasts have now been turning their attention to the mysterious activities in the waters of Alaska. One incident dates back to 1945 when crew members of a ship reported spotting an unidentified craft. Researchers, including members of MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, which is a non-profit organization that studies reported UFO sightings, they think it's possible that extraterrestrial beings have been constructing bases beneath the ocean's surface, and that's because there are tons of reports of UFO movements over the water. There were also a number of UFO sightings in the 40s that weren't disclosed to the public at the time. These undisclosed reports allegedly provide evidence that there are extraterrestrial entities operating in the waters off the coast of Alaska. This next story comes to us from Reddit, and although what this person saw wasn't technically under the water, it was floating just above it, and it's a pretty fascinating account. The story comes to us from user Keslow, who writes, I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina back around 2006, and I had a job that had me leaving home at about 4 a.m. I lived in a bad part of town near the International Airport Joint Base, so when I left, I did a scan of the area before getting into my car. One morning, I stepped out of my home to do my scan and noticed that there were thin, wispy clouds flowing in off the ocean. Basically, it was a thin fog, about 1,000 to 1,500 feet up, moving like a river. I also noticed at this point that there were two effing moons. One is obscured by the thin clouds, our real moon, and the other is most definitely under the clouds. It was a sphere of glowing white light. It made no sound and did not move. After about 2 minutes, it bolted eastward towards the ocean. The glowing light faded quickly right as it took off as well. I've seen planes move near the speed of sound, and this thing went from 0 to like 3,000 miles per hour instantly. No acceleration. Much faster than the speed of sound with no sonic boom. I hope I don't see it again, especially on the water. I always wondered if it bolted because they saw me watching them. Project Magnet was Canada's government investigation into UFOs. It was launched in December of 1950 by Wilbert B. Smith, a senior radio engineer with the Canadian Department of Transport. Smith had a personal interest in UFOs and believed that they could be scientifically studied. So the main goal of the project was to attempt to figure out what these UFOs were, and if it was possible, they could be using Earth's magnetic field as a source of propulsion. The project involved setting up monitoring stations across Canada equipped with specialized equipment to detect and analyze magnetic and radio frequency disturbances. Smith hoped that by capturing data from these disturbances, they could find patterns and similarities with UFO sightings. Now, Wilbert Brockhouse Smith was an interesting guy. He did believe that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin and had psychic abilities. He also believed that aliens were communicating to him through the use of telepathy.
Unbeknownst to some, the United States is not the only one with an Area 51 style top secret UFO alien base. That's right, Russia has their very own version of the not so secret alien bunker located in rural Siberia and referred to as Kapustin Yar. It makes sense. I mean, Russia was the first country to send a living being up to space back in 1957, so it's only natural that they would have some kind of corner on the market of UFO and alien artifacts. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the first living being in space was a dog named Laika, who unfortunately did not make it back down to Earth, but that's a sad story for another day. While some of the non-believers might claim that Kapustin Yar is nothing more than a regular military base used for radar systems, satellite tracking, and low-level nuclear weapons testing, it should be noted that the Russian government didn't even acknowledge the base's existence until 1983, and furthermore, many former employees have claimed that while working on the base, they witnessed not only the reverse engineering of alien spacecrafts, but actual alien autopsies as well. And personally, I feel like this whole nuclear weapons testing thing has become such a popular way for secret military bases to keep people from getting too close. I mean, really, name a better deterrent than radiation poisoning. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to know if aliens exist as much as the next guy, but nothing is worth that. It's awful. Don't Google it.
Antarctica, yes, all of it. Antarctica has gained quite a reputation for being a hotspot for UFO sightings and theories about secret government bases dedicated to studying them. It's remote, inhospitable, makes for an ideal cover for secretive activities. Nobody really wants to go to Antarctica. It's desolate, the weather sucks. So not only would most people veer clear of it anyway, but makes it very difficult for ordinary people to access, allowing secretive operations to take place in secrecy. Some conspiracy theorists have pointed out images with unusual formations in the ice taken with satellites, which some people think could be entrances to underground military facilities and stuff like that. Some even believe there are pyramid-type structures there buried under the ice that might have been built by some ancient civilization, possibly with the help of extraterrestrials or just built by aliens entirely. The governments of the world, especially the United States and Russia, are said to have established secret research facilities in Antarctica to study alien technology and artifacts.
A top secret outpost located in the small town of Dulce, New Mexico, was apparently erected in the 1900s to monitor alien communication signals as well as other weird happenings that tend to come with the territory. According to locals living in the town, which has a population of about 2,700 people and not one single traffic light, alien signals were first intercepted in 1979. The following year, something strange happened. The bodies of dead animals began turning up all over town, mutilated in ways that one could not or would not want to explain. I will not be explaining because this is YouTube, not the dark web. In the years that followed, individuals who claimed to have been associated with the base, nicknamed the Dulce Alien Center, started coming forward. One man claimed to have helped build the facility and to even have witnessed a full-on battle between humans and alien beings. After that, UFO sightings in the town skyrocketed, probably because people now knew what to look for. Fast forward to today, and reports of UFO sightings are still pretty common in the small town of Dulce, as well as reports reports of top secret military projects, despite the fact that the government insists it has a total of 0 bases in the area. But who's buying that?
Majestic 12, often referred to simply as MJ-12, is at the heart of pretty much everything we've talked about on this list. The organization is basically the king of government alien cover-up conspiracies. The story goes that in 1947, following the Roswell incident, where a supposed UFO crash occurred, President Truman established Majestic 12 as a secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials whose mission was to investigate and cover up evidence of extraterrestrials. According to conspiracy theorists, MJ-12's members included figures from the military, the scientific community, who would manage recovered alien technology, study it, possibly even operate on aliens. Documents about MJ-12 allegedly leaked in 1985. UFOologists William Moore and Stanton Friedman claimed they'd been pointed to them by an anonymous whistleblower. One of the most disturbing chapters in the lore of MJ-12, though, is their possible involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Why? In order to prevent him from disclosing classified information about UFOs and aliens. We have a whole video on MJ-12, so check that one out after this one. Next up, we have the strange reports of a large disc-like object being spotted in the Indian Ocean. Apparently, as far back as 1873, ships sailing the Indian Ocean from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea have reported spotting a massive mile-wide disc passing beneath their boats, accompanied by large, rotating lights. One of the earliest documented sightings happened on March 23rd of 1873, when the ship Adelaide traversed the South China Sea. Witnesses reported floating over a huge, glowing circular object beneath the ocean's surface. On May 15th, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture described the sighting of 2 large Ferris wheels spinning in opposite directions. The spokes of these wheels were reported to be 25 feet wide, with 100 feet of space between them. There have been tons of these reports in various locations in the Indian Ocean, over the years. On April 4th, 1901, for example, in the Persian Gulf, the crew of the SS Kilwa claimed to see rays of light emanating from an underwater disc-like object. And even in 1943, in the Persian Gulf, a sailor named Matthew Mangle reported a huge glowing disc beneath the water's surface, pacing his ship. And these are just a handful of examples. And coming in at second place is the Michigan Stonehenge. So in 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology, Mark Hawley, made a pretty incredible discovery. It was this arrangement of stones lying on the lake bed, looking a lot like Stonehenge in England. The stones are laid out in a circular pattern, and some even appear to be arranged in a line. They're about 40 feet below the surface of the lake. So what was the purpose of this formation? Could it be the remnants of an ancient civilization? Could extraterrestrials have constructed it thousands of years ago? They look like they've been placed in a pretty precise pattern. Doesn't look to be natural forming to me. And of course, there's also a rock with a mastodon carved into it. Hard to believe something like that would be created naturally. What's also really fascinating is that these stones are believed to be about 9,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by about 4,000 years. And finally, it's only natural that we finish things off with what has to be the most famous strange object discovered deep beneath the sea, the Baltic Sea anomaly. So back in the summer of 2011, a team of Swedish treasure hunters didn't come across any treasure in terms of monetary gain anyway, but they did find something pretty cool, a sonar image that seems to show a strange UFO-like object on the sea floor. Peter Lindbergh, the leader of the treasure hunting team, would be so awesome just to be able to say you're the leader of a treasure hunting team. I could say that and I'd just be digging through my backyard, finding nothing. But this guy actually goes out on boats and submarines and does it. I didn't get that job. Anyway, he's the leader of Ocean X and was pretty astonished by what he had found, saying the object definitely didn't look like a natural formation. And even though a number of researchers have come out and said it probably is a natural formation, I still get excited looking at this thing. I don't know, I'm just not entirely convinced. I'm on the fence fence about this one, but what do you guys think? Alien craft, ancient artifact, just some mundane natural formation? Let us know down in them comments. All right, time for a quick comment shout out. This was posted on my top 10 dark discoveries made by farmers video and comes from Kenny Boggs 3676, who writes, he wasn't a farmer, but I heard a famous story from the 1947 UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico, that a rancher named Mac Brazel found these strange looking pieces of metal on his property that were lightweight and could be crumpled up like paper, but still return to their original shape. And then he found this metal thing that looked like a control panel of some kind with handprints that obviously did not look human and strange symbols written on it. Then the military showed up, confiscated everything, and told him not to mention this to anyone. That is a really cool story. I love when you guys post stories you find in those comments. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. Viewer discretion advised. It's about disturbing real-life demon photos that you won't believe are real, but have been confirmed by the Pope himself. Click the video now to find out more. See you guys in the next video.